what I want to do over the next couple of videos is to talk about some business topics. And what I want to start with is just kind of some fun. Here are some pop in. What are the sorts of, so you get a sense of what are my ideas, business ideas. Then I want to put together some more organized stuff that will run in some series. A piece of this I'd like it to be is those of you out there who maybe aren't running your own business or don't want to run your own business or whatever, I want you to get a sense of why you might be interested in this stuff too. Because I think there's a lot to be learned as an employee. I think if you're an employee of a company, by the way, I think you should see yourself as a product. I think in the most basic sense, because moving your way through a company is really about maximizing what you bring to the table. And in the most competitive sense, you should see yourself as a product. That's more, you need to make your product more valuable than the other products. And so there's lots in here that I think you're going to find, and it might be somebody, if you're out there listening and you don't see yourself as a business owner or whatever, you're definitely a business person because you participate in business all the time. You participate in it as a customer, you participate in it as an employee, or there's just all sorts of ways. You're constantly interacting with business. Business and life, we are a democratic republic and we're a capitalist society. Those are the things that define, in the largest sense, what we are. And so you can't separate them. There's not a hard line between those things. And so that's a piece of it. As I'd like you to begin to see how I think about things. And so what I'm going to do is I'm having my off-camera person ask me some questions and talk about some individual ones. So the first one she brought up is employees, and some thoughts about employees and how do I hire employees and how do you get hired as an employee. And it's an interesting time to talk about employees because I think the concept of work, the concept of employment is one of the giant dividing points in the country right now. The socialists of our country, like AOC, Bernie Sanders, their view of value brought from a product in a company is diametrically opposed to capitalism, and capitalism has been the driver of the 20th and 21st centuries. Okay? That without a doubt, the world as we understand it would not exist without capitalism. And it won't continue to exist without capitalism. To the point at which, if you start looking at socialism and communism, there's almost no place else in the world outside of a couple of little isolated, smaller, weaker countries like North Korea that are moving deeper into socialism, communism spectrum. Everywhere else, China, Cuba, the old bastions of socialism are moving away from it. It's funny because I regularly end up on my social media, which is, I spend time on Reddit, in discussions with people who want to point out, they always want to bring up the Scandinavian countries as the bastion of socialism, and yet they are not. They are not socialist countries, not by definitions of socialism. They have socialized healthcare. That's their pinnacle one overall. But it's interesting, those countries really were leading, coming out of the 80s into the 90s, on the forefront of becoming socialist, and they've walked away from it. And if you look at international rankings of business freedom, of what are the most capitalist nations, the Scandinavian countries rank above the US. They rank higher. And when you start looking at socialism, you look at things like government owning industries. Okay? They have divested of industries. They are becoming more and more averse to allowing government to own things like power companies and things like that. They believe that capitalism, that the idea of competition drives efficiency, and competition comes from the individual citizens owning something and building something for value for themselves, which is human nature. So where are we parting with the people like Bernie Sanders and them? They believe that when you have a product, okay, you have a product like this, that most of the value in this is created by the employee, by the worker. They call them workers. That's a very communist term. Workers. And what they do is they take raw materials that are worth this much, and they do the physical work of assembling it into this, and that makes it worth this much. And then the evil capitalists, they only give this much of that to the worker, and they take all that for themselves. And the problem with that is it's utter bullshit. The value did not come from assembling this. The value came from inventing this and developing it. And the value is directly related to risk. Employees in America, being an employee is almost a zero risk proposition. What do I mean by that? If I let you show up at my business and spend time inside my business as an employee, I must pay you a minimum amount, and I must pay you the amount we've said, and I must pay the government money for that time, and all of these rules go with it. Nobody guarantees me that the time you spent there is worth a penny. It's not. So the last business I built with my partner, we spent a lot of money. We spent $500,000 developing a business, investing in tooling, investing in people. At one point, we had somewhere $50,000 a month in employee costs. Okay? We were developing a product that at the time that it was ready to go, at that moment, we couldn't find an avenue for selling it. And so, at the moment, what we have is hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff sitting on shelves. Okay? But understand that every one of those employees got everything that they were promised. They got paid for every minute they were there. And honestly, some of them didn't return a very good return on that investment. That's part of the whole employee thing. Employees are risk. Everything a business owner does is risk. You take a pile of money and you take an idea and you try to combine them into something that's eventually going to create a greater amount of money. Perfect example of it. Today, there was a biomedical company today withdraw their application for 2 vaccines for COVID. So COVID, a year ago, everything's going crazy, everything's blowing up. Anybody who is in the business of making medicines wanted to be in the vaccine business. It's obviously, not only does the world need it, but it's worth a fortune. Okay? So a giant race began, and there were dozens upon dozens of separate lines being spread out of trying to create a vaccine. The company that was involved in the news story today, one of the big things they were pushing for was an oral vaccine. Okay? Why do they want an oral vaccine? Well, because you can give it to yourself. Okay, so an oral vaccine is dramatically easier to distribute. So why might somebody want to do that? Well, because it means you can cut out all of them. It becomes something you can very easily go and get from your pharmacist and take it. So that's when you start going, okay, each of these companies want to solve the problem. And from a capitalist standpoint, I don't care if they want to fix it for all of us who need it or if they want to do it for profit. Wanting to do it for profit is positive. It is the driver that makes it happen. It made all these groups go. The problem is when you get to the end of it, these companies were in final stage proofs of it. They were testing it. It was out to thousands of people. And what they found was it was not as effective as the current ones. So right now they're saying that the greatest thing about the leading vaccines that are out there right now, like Pfizer's vaccine, is that Pfizer put out initially and said that they thought that their vaccine was like 92% effective, meaning that out of 100 people, 92 of them, if exposed, would not catch the virus out of that. And then it actually got bumped up. They said maybe it's 95. And I'm now hearing that it's actually higher than that. It's probably 97, 98%, which, by the way, makes it the most effective vaccine in the history of the world. And it turns out several of them landed on the same solution because there happens to be a new technology that was out among multiple companies. They all went after it the same way. It builds your immune system a different way than the others. All of those things were happening, so it's very, very competitive. But a company that wasn't building off of that was looking at it at another point of advantage. The point of advantage they were going after is distribution system. And I suspect they did that because that's why they did it. It might be that that's just all they had, whatever. They were on this track over here to do it. But today they announced they're pulling. They were pulling both of their 2 vaccines that they had in the works to be approved. What do you think it cost those companies to develop those 2 vaccines that didn't come through to fruition? The numbers are astronomical. You'd be blown away, really, when you start looking at medicines. Think about this. You have an idea for a product, but the idea for your product is one that you're going to have to, you got to develop it based upon lots of science, but then at some point you're going to have to inject it into human beings. What do you think the liability cost on that is? I've never done that. I'm not sure you'd even want to be involved in developing something like that. Oh, by the way, some of the people you injected into are going to die because you did it. Not because you did anything wrong, but because some people are going to be allergic to it. Some people, and you're not going to know ahead of time.